So, I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and I think we have an exciting program. I think that this new discovery, and also I've become more and more fond of youthful energy. And so to see a young man who is interested in local history in the way that he is just really pleasing to me. So now I'm going to introduce you to a fabulous guy, Jessie Angelino. I am so pleased that we have become sort of friends and pen pals, and he has a fascinating program, great research, right? Great researcher. So, Jessie, go ahead.
Hey everyone. I see some familiar faces. I see some not so familiar faces. So just real quick, I'm going to introduce who I am. I'm Jessie Angelino, as Carolyn just mentioned. I grew up in New York City until I was 5, and then my mom moved up here during what I called the quaint Greene County tourism boom. That would be Reptile Land, Carson City, Catskill Game Farm, Friar Tuck. This place was crazy back then. And it was, our family owned a bar in Palinville. You all probably know it as the Griffin House, but once upon a time it was Oh Boys. And my mom was just trying to cash in on all the tourism too. So we moved up here. It was nicer than Queens. So I've been in Palinville almost ever since. I currently live in Caro, but at 30 years, I've been in the area. So I know a lot. I've read a lot. And about 2 years ago, I think it was it was December 10th, 2022, the Victorian Walk in Athens, New York. I don't know if any of you have ever participated in it. I went on my buddy Jonathan Palmer, some of you might know him too. He was giving a historical walk in the cemetery. And after the walk, I introduced him to my friend Celia Scarrett. She's from this area. Her dad is Stephen Scarrett. And the two of them got to talking about her history on the mountaintop, and a name popped up that I'd never heard of before, but it was very interesting. It stuck out to me. It was Merwin. And the reason why it stuck out to me is because it sounded like one of those very old, prominent names, like you should know it, even if I didn't. And Jonathan said, well, that's very interesting. He's like, jokingly, he's like, I wonder if you would be related to Jessie Merwin. And, he proceeded to tell me that Jessie Merwin was the inspiration for Ichabod Crane in Washington Irving's story, The Headless Horseman. And this is all blowing my mind. I had no idea about any of this. I had no idea that there was a basis for this person. I had no idea that this family had a connection like that. And it just, with the historical research I already do normally, I was like, I hope there's a way I can prove my friend Celia is related to Ichabod Crane. That'd be so neat. And it took me a couple of years and a lot of headaches, because this is a very old family. And there's a lot of ways you can get twisted and turned around when you're going far enough back. But I figured it out. And I'm going to show you guys how I figured it out today. And I'm going to show you everything else I figured out along the way. That's almost maybe even more interesting than that fact. So this is my little computer, sorry. This is what I got. This is what I'm working with today. But yeah, so this is Jessie Merwin. He was from Milford, Connecticut, and he ended up going out towards he ended up in Columbia County. He ended up in Kinderhook. Here's another thing that I was always confused by, was that there's a Headless Horseman story in Tarrytown down by the Tappan Zee Bridge, but then what's going on in Columbia County? Where's that story come from? Well, it turns out that the story was supposed to have taken place, in Columbia County, but when he wrote it for Tarrytown. I'm still not exactly sure on that. That wasn't the focus of my research, but it was just something that always confused me ever since I was a young kid. So just in case any of you guys were also wondering the same thing as I was, took place in Kinderhook, was written for Tarrytown. Not exactly sure why Washington Irving was a man of the world. Maybe he just liked that particular area. I'm not very sure. But Jessie Merwin was a schoolmaster. He was a schoolmaster in Kinderhook, New York. He was married to Jan Van Dyne. And he didn't do too bad for himself back then. He was actually He wasn't, another funny thing is he's always portrayed as like cowardly in all of the stories, which was something I had discussed with that friend Celia I had mentioned. And she was, now that the idea that this guy might be related to her comes up, she's like, why is he cowardly? Why? Because he saw a headless ghost? I'm sorry, what would you do? Is it commonplace to remain calm under that kind of a circumstance? No, I don't think he was a coward. I think he was probably in his right mind to be fearful, but. Another thing I'd like to just say to everyone is I don't want to move too fast and I don't want to lose anyone. So at any given point, you don't have to wait for me to switch a slide. You can raise your hand. This isn't a press conference. You can, at any point, feel free to ask me questions. I've done everything I can to try to facilitate anything that you guys might want to know about. So just jump right on in whenever you want. Don't think that that's going to mess me up or anything like that. Washington Irving, you all know him, the Rip Van Winkle, the Headless Horseman, right? And he had a ton of poems and stuff like that. A lot of the locals seem to think that he was kind of concentrated in Greene County. That's not true. He was a man of the world. He would go to Europe all the time, and just hi.
He was friends with the brothers Grimm in Germany.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
I did not know that he was friends with the brothers Grimm. He's a good storyteller,
And he wrote a book. He was a diplomat in Spain, and he lived in the Alhambra. He wrote a book about the Alhambra.
I had heard he was a diplomat in Spain. I had not heard that he had written another book like that. So I'll have to probably also look into that, because this is my new best friend now that I'm done with. Now that I'm not. I won't say I'm done with the Merwins, but I will say now that I can take a break from them, because I think I have a pretty good amalgamation here. Carolyn.
So his story, Rip Van Winkle, is actually a very artful retelling of a Brothers Grimm tale, which is called Peter Klaus. So if you look at Peter Klaus, you'll see how closely he follows even the language, but he sets it in the Catskills.
I didn't know that, and I had only just made it, I shouldn't say an assumption, but an educated guess that because this was kind of like a Romanicist period, I just assumed that he had kind of maybe taken it from a Native American legend. That wouldn't have been that crazy back then to just like hear something that well traveled. Probably would have been an indigenous myth, that he probably would have heard from, could have been school children, a couple of guys at the bar might have discussed it, and then he would have been like, oh, what if we spice it up? What if it was Henry Hudson's ghost that got him drunk, So, and Washington Irving. So Jessie Merwin and Washington Irving are friends. These guys hang out all the time. There's a third guy that they hang out with, but I'm going to get to that. So, Washington Irving, he's friends with Jessie Merwin, and he's just, I guess he tells him, he's just like, I want to make this character based off of you. And Jessie has no problem with it, except that for some reason he makes him sound like a little physically worn in his tale. Jessie Merwin, if I can just tread back for a second, he's well, hold on a second. He's not a bad looking guy, but if you go back and you look at the actual description of him in the Headless Horseman, they call him like knobby-kneed. They make references to his face kind of having the profile of a scarecrow. His hands are too big. They just sort of make him sound like an oaf, which is I don't know. If one of my friends portrayed me like that in a book that not only became world famous but has endured through the ages, I'd be very upset. So guys, Washington Irving, just watch what you say to him. Anyway, world literary genius. And then we come to the third member of our little triumvirate, Martin Van Buren, 8th president of the United States. You guys might have seen his beautiful home, Lindenwold, over in Kinderhook as well. He is, he's just sort of there for the ride, hanging out with them. He's from that town, and he's always going to be rubbing elbows with people that are up and coming in the area, just like he himself was. Another funny thing is they're all men of very soft mannerisms. It's like these weren't really a rough and tumble group of guys, which might have been another case for chemistry and on why they all got along. Martin Van Buren as a president was kind of known to sort of he was very famous for rolling with the punches, going with the flow. He didn't like to rock the boat. Washington Irving was a very mild-mannered, he was a writer, There's not a lot of us that are brawlers or kind of like laborers or anything like that. And we have Jesse Merwin, who, whether he was or was not, was portrayed as a coward. So these were all just sort of like very gentle guys, you know, like Martin Van Buren even himself would take lots of pilgrimages out into the countryside. Those trails near his home, they weren't, I don't believe that they were trails back then. They might have been orchards and, you know, small thickets of wood where he would wander by himself for hours and just like really appreciate the beauty of the time. These aren't like militant guys. And yeah, so we have these three guys all hanging out. And the reason why I bring up President Martin Van Buren, other than the fact that he was also friends with them, is because years down the line, a question was called: was Jesse Merwin actually the inspiration for Ichabod Crane? And it was George Merwin who proposed this. And Martin Van Buren had to step up, and he was like, listen, I was there, all right? He was just like, I am telling you, he was like, Irving made Ichabod Crane for Jesse Merwin. I promise you that. Or I'm sorry, it was called into question then. And then later on down the line, Martin Van Buren actually had a nephew who, again, had to publicize in a newspaper. I think it was in 1889. Again, he had to be like, because you guys are calling this into question again, I want you to know that Jesse Merwin is, in fact, the inspiration for Ichabod Crane. He even presented a letter, actually, if I could. Holly, could I have my bag for a second?
It's right behind the door.
Oh, sure, yeah, I'm just gonna grab this. This is I'd like to properly cite this from the article that I wrote for the Porcupine Soup. This is a letter from Martin Van Buren that was written that said, I have known Jesse Merwin for about a third of a century and believe him to be a man of honor and integrity, and that he is the same person celebrated in the writings of the Honorable Washington Irving under the character of Ichabod Crane. And again, like I said, this testimony was reinforced by Van Buren's it was his great nephew in an 1889 newspaper interview where he is quoted as saying, upon the outside of a letter received from Merwin, he endorsed him as the original Ichabod Crane, not as, you know, he doesn't have as much pomp as as Martin, but yeah, so this is so thankfully I have a former president to back up the fact that this is true. Jesse Merwin was the inspiration for Ichabod Crane. But how do I get a guy whose entire clan is kind of marginalized over in Kinderhook across the river, not only to this side of the river, but all the way up here in the mountains? Well, I have to start with Jesse. So I go down to I paid a visit to Kinderhook, and I paid a visit to Lisa, I hope I don't get her last name wrong, I think it was Wybacker, at the Columbia County Historical Society, and she brings me into the library's forbidden section. I'm just kidding, they're the reference books. You can't check them out. They're very old text. I went in there and I found, it was very old. It looked like almost like someone had dictated what they had seen of Miles Merwin's crossing. Now Miles Merwin, he's the guy who started it all. Miles comes over here from Plymouth, England, and I made this note. It's probably nothing big, but I always thought it was cool, was that Merwin was an old Welsh name that is derived from the word Mervyn, which was derived from an even older name, Merlin. Now, whether or not that has anything to do with Camelot or any of that other stuff, I'm sure it doesn't, but it's just a little fun fact that I thought of. Miles landed at Nantasket Beach in 1630. That's in the Massachusetts colony, and he came over from Plymouth, England. His crossing was, I do believe, well, he came over. This is another interesting thing. I can't find any records of what happened to Miles's parents. It's not that there's no record of them dying or abandoning him or anything like that. As far back as I can check, he always just seems to be with his Aunt Abigail, who is related to his immediate family, and his uncle, John Branker, who is he's an elder and a schoolmaster. And they're the ones who decided to bring him on over to the Americas. The crossing was something close to like 8 weeks, between 8 and 10 weeks. I can't imagine. I'm 38 years old. I don't think I could sit on a boat for that long. So being as young as Miles was, I can't even imagine what you would possibly do to while away that kind of time. But he comes over here, and after a couple of years, I think they spent 5 years living in the Dorchester neighborhood of Boston, Massachusetts. And then they kind of make their way out to the Connecticut River area in 1636. And it was an area taken from the Mohegan tribe that the English settlers changed the name to Windsor, excuse me. And Miles starts to grow up there, and that's when at the age of 17, he meets Elizabeth Powell. This will become his wife. This will become, and at the age of 17, he also becomes a tanner. As you guys can imagine, that was a really like lucrative business back in the day. So yeah, he's 17 years old. He's growing up in the Connecticut River area of Windsor, and he meets Elizabeth Powell, and the two of them have, I think it was 7 children. 7 children. Yes, that's Elizabeth, John, Thomas, Abigail, named for his aunt, and then he has Samuel, Miles Jr., and Daniel. So, I'm sorry, I know it's a little hard for you guys to tell from my screen. I'll explain it to you. After Samuel, I've written here Greene County Merwins, and after Miles Jr., I have written Columbia County Merwins, and this is a little trick I use to kind of remember who's who and who comes from where. This is me trying to start my attempt to genealogically show you who came from where, how they ended up here, who's related to who. So Miles, our first Merwin, he's the one that started it all. His son Samuel is who will eventually go on to have Thomas Merwin, who comes up here with Esther Ives, and they form the Merwins we all know who founded Jewett. So all of our Greene County Merwins, they come from Samuel. Miles Jr., well, he sort of like is going to be the progenitor to Jessie Merwin. Couple generations, obviously, but he's going to be the Merwin presence in Columbia County. And the little trick I use is calling, if you're from Greene County, then you would be the sons and daughters of Samuel, assuming you're a Merwin. And if you're from Columbia County, you would be the sons and daughters of Miles Jr. And, it took a long time to trace, but luckily I had the help of a Merwin who is in this room today. That would be Kara over here. So Kara, I really feel like this is important, so I'm going to try to show you guys. This is Kara's collection. Not only is Kara a Merwin, she is a Merwin that cares deeply about her family's history, and she has these Merwin Family in North America volumes. I don't know if you guys can see how thick this book is. That's volume 1. That's what starts us. This isn't even the Merwin lineage of England. This is just in the New England Bay colonies. Can I ask you a question? Has anyone here ever been to the New York City Public Library with the stone lions from Ghostbusters, right? So how many of you guys have ever been to the museum inside? You ever see they have a King James Bible printed entirely in Latin? Gutenberg press, right? I don't think I've ever seen a book that big until Kara let me hold that one. And 3 hours we were on Main Street Catskill deciphering and trying to figure out who was who while the Catskill High School was undergoing a protest. Very distracting when we figured it out. So yeah, this is, we went back and I had to sit there, 1, 2, follow every family line from all of Miles and Elizabeth's children. All 7 of them, had to figure out where they went. Someone started these families here in Greene County and in Columbia County. I got to figure out who. So you cut through the lines and you keep going down and eventually traced them back. Samuel and Miles Jr. Those are the 2 guys that are sitting on opposite sides of the river, even to this day. So yeah, once I was able to figure that out, I had to also kind of like figure out where. Now I knew that Thomas Merwin, who married Esther Ives and founded Jewett, I knew that they were the descendants of. I knew they were the descendants of Samuel. But when I was still, on the side note, when I was still trying to figure out the connection, because not only am I trying to figure out how they're related to the Greene County Merwins, I'm also trying to figure out how they're related to my friend Celia. So now I'm doing a little more research into the founding of Jewett, and how Thomas and Esther did that. And for a reference, I used this book which Jonathan Palmer recommended. It's the Reverend Henry Hedges Pratt. He did. It's called Old Times in Windham, and it sort of reads like old newspaper articles that would have been written back in the day during when it was still like mostly a logging tannery village. And Went to go visit Thomas Merwin himself, born June 22nd, 1737, died December 7th, 1814 in Jewett, a blacksmith by trade. Back then, a blacksmith wasn't the worst job you can have. You actually made a decent amount of money doing it. It was just a job that for some reason, I won't say thankless, but didn't have a lot of recognition. You weren't like a superstar if you were a blacksmith. But everyone in town still loved you. You know, you made the horseshoes, you made weapons, you made crockery, fireplaces, you know, anything that you wanted to last back then, and that's a commodity, you would probably have to go see your blacksmith with. So that was Thomas Merwin. And
Where is that?
This is Thomas Merwin's grave, which is located in Jewett off of where the Merwins all kind of like laid their roots, Merwin Street, if I could make it any simpler. It's located in Jewett. It is a beautiful cemetery. It's actually, their graves are very like well maintained. When I was still researching, trying to figure out if there were any Merwins that were in Prattsville before Wyndham, since these two towns switched territories a lot. There's, at one point, I think even Woodstock was like up in Prattsville's business and stuff like that. So it gets really hard to figure out who was here first, because I don't know which town, you know, they're counting. But I went to the Prattsville. It's not the Prattsville Cemetery. There is a rural cemetery located here in Prattsville, and it's kind of off the beaten path. And I wish I could give you the address, but it's just.
It's called the Upper Cemetery. So there's
Yes.
the upper and the lower. So anyone that goes on the old Gilboa Road, first they go past what we now call the Pratt Cemetery. That's the lower cemetery. And then as they drive towards Gilboa, they don't see it because it's covered by trees. But that's the upper cemetery, which was pre-Pratt. So about 1765 to 1830, let's say. That's the one you were at,
Yes,
right?
yes, that was it. It wasn't far from the original Pratt Cemetery, but it was like I said, it was off the beaten path. It's not really marked. You're not going to really notice it unless you're looking for it. But and I found some Merwin graves up there, and they are old. Unfortunately, they are not as well maintained as Thomas's or Esther's. Nevertheless, they are very important. As most of them are also still involved with the direct line from Jessie Merwin and going all the way to Thomas Merwin. These are names that I probably wouldn't have been able to piece certain things with unless I had seen them for myself. A lot of the genealogical stuff, before I had access to Kara's wonderful and useful texts, a lot of this was taking me a long time. 2 years is a long time to be researching one family, even as busy as people can get. And the reason is because the genealogy online is not always the most reliable. And not only do I study history, I am a journalist, I'm a newspaper reporter, and I do believe in due diligence. So I do not want to be throwing names out there, no matter how convenient they would have made my life at some points, because it looked like an easy way out. I was like, oh, the only other headache I would probably say is just the fact that a lot of the male names in the Merwin clan, they get recycled a lot. Every generation has a Daniel, a Thomas, and a Miles Jr., Jr., Jr. They love the name Miles. That is like the most popular Merwin name. But the females have very interesting. I found a Malfina Merwin. This is back in England. And she was just a housewife, she took care of kids, she cleaned, but with a name like Malfina, I always like to believe that she was like this mysterious stage magician or something like that. Anyway, it was recorded in Old Times in Wyndham that there were once 49 Merwin children attending school in Jewett. That's not a big school back then. This is, again, Jewett's still kind of like hitting the ground running. They're building up. So, I mean, don't mess with the Merwins, right? Be kind to every Merwin girl you date. Don't pick any fights with the boys. They're an army. 49, I don't even know 49 people. Anyway, what was also interesting during this time was that so I had read that it was the indigenous peoples of Schoharie. Carolyn, you might be able to help me with this. I had read that it was the indigenous peoples of Schoharie and northwestern Greene County at the time that were kind of making raids on Jewett even during its founding, to the point where it was utilitarian to have I put the Mohicans because that, as far as my research goes, they were the dominant nation in this area. But there were so many sub-nations that I didn't want to besmirch any smaller tribes. You know, like how the Iroquois are. You could take a subsection of them and have the Esopus. I'm not too familiar with the subsections of tribes from this area, so just in case anybody was like, well, hold on a second, I just wanted to let you guys know they're all lumped together as Mohicans, but there is the possibility that there could have been sub-tribes from this area or from Schoharie County nearby and Delaware that could have, you know, also been partaking in this. These raids were actually so daily that at night it was utilitarian to have a bar of wood that you would actually put up against your door, because they would try to get into the middle of the night. They weren't too fond of us creeping into their area. They were sort of, you know, trading maybe a little bit more friendlier when we were in the mountains, but as we're encroaching, keep going kind of farther back west towards, you know, like, I won't say as far as Oneonta, but going in that direction, you know, they felt like they were kind of being threatened a little bit, and they started fighting back. So as I also read in Old Times in Wyndham, that bar would also apply to school. So imagine you're also in school and everyone, you know, like not every day, but like if there had been a lot of raids in the area lately, you might be called upon, hey, you know, Jimmy, can you put the bar up against the door? We heard that there's some tribes out, and, you know, trying to focus and concentrate on arithmetic, knowing that there's guys trying to kill you. So again, like I said, the Merwins have a fascinating history in this area. And this brings me to the Merwins in modernity. I spoke to, I believe her name is Cindy LaPierre over at the Mountaintop Historical Society, and her and a good friend of mine, Dennis Lucas, were able to point me in the direction of, this is me now trying to track down other Merwins. Kara, actually, I was able to find online. I also spoke to a Pat Merwin, who Cindy and Dennis had told me about. They gave me her phone number, and I reached out and I spoke to her, and I told her what I was doing. I said, I'm writing a story for the Porcupine Soup about the history of this amazing family, and how, you know, what started off as just a fascination between an old Washington Irving legend has turned into this really interesting story about this family that, and this is only like supposed. This isn't a fact, but it has been made, what's the word? It has been said kind of in passing that if they are not the biggest family in North America, they obviously are one of the biggest families in North America. And that means that there's going to be a lot of stories for each of them individually, but it also means that there's going to be a lot of history if you're going to be involved with a clan that large. And I spoke to Pat Merwin, and even though it wasn't as exciting as maybe rubbing elbows with a former president or, you know, fending off Native American attacks, you know, she told me she had a husband, I think his name was Ernest. And he would go out to the old Tops in Tannersville. It was Great American back then. And he just sort of worked there. He was a happy guy. All the locals seemed to like him. And then he would just sell crockery out of his car. That's it, you know. His ancestors have done enough. His ancestors have done so many cool things that, you know, he's just living his best life now. He's just having a great old time. Still here in the mountaintop, though. That's pretty cool. You know, these guys came here a really, really long time ago, and they're still here today. I already told you, this is my friend. You can't really see him, but this is my friend Steve and Celia. Steve's mother was, I believe her name was Ethel Carr Merwin, and she was another local from around here. And she had unfortunately passed by the time that I had gotten a hold of Steve for this, and I had said, well, you know, what did she do? I'm trying to put together this amalgamation of Merwin lifetimes and everything that they'd accomplished and all the cool stories that they've left behind. And he goes, well, she used to work for the Colgates, and the only time I'd ever heard that name was the lake. So I had no idea that they were a wealthy family from around here, and Ethel used to just take care of their horses, do a couple of things around the kitchen. She was young, you know, it wasn't a career or anything. It was just a little bit of money coming her way, and a fun place to probably spend your summers and things like that. But just as I had mentioned to you before that across the river, Jessie Merwin would have been hanging out with Martin Van Buren and Washington Irving, I tried to think. I was like, well, you know, I kind of started noticing this weird timeline that could have popped. Like, has anyone here heard of Me Dad Hunt?
Yeah, sure.
Medad Hunt. So he was, what I was going to say is there's some parallels between what happened in Columbia County with Jessie, Washington Irving, and Martin Van Buren. You know, I'm from Greene County. I'm like, well, who did we have? And I would say that Jessie, we had Thomas Merwin, and during the same timeline, living in the same area, we had Medad Hunt. Medad Hunt was an innkeeper, which probably didn't sound that exciting, coming out of the gates right now. But I want you to think about this. Wyndham is just sort of being settled, and his, the area hasn't really taken root yet. And he's an innkeeper on the fringes of the wilderness out here, where we already know that there's Native American attacks. That means animals are probably pretty getting very brutal up here. So imagine you kind of are, you're running in. So you're also kind of like the only bartender around. You're hearing all the hunters, you're hearing all the trappers and the loggers coming in, and they're telling you all these interesting stories about what's going on with them up in the forest. So in a way, Medad was kind of like our Washington Irving. He was the storyteller. He would have been able to tell you, take this route if you're going out west and watch out because I heard that there's brigands or Mohicans over there, or we had panthers back then, large ones, that unfortunately I think have been hunted to extinction, but nevertheless, they were around here. And I don't have any, there's no document of them ever meeting, but it is in the lifetime of Zadock Pratt, who was also living in this area, who could have been their kind of political, their political hangout guy instead of Martin Van Buren. He was the father of Greene County, and he did a bunch of remarkable things, but all three of them lived in the same timeline. So even though it's not documented that they could have met, I can't imagine that in a town as small as Wyndham that they wouldn't have known each other at some point or another. And it's just interesting to think about that they could have possibly gotten together at some point and discuss. I mean, he was a Merwin. They definitely knew of the Merwins, right? 49 kids in the class, and that's not including his two brothers, and they're off having their own, So, I think another thing I wanted to touch on since when I was doing research for the Headless Horseman, trying to figure out, just reading about Jessie Merwin and all that, I noticed something. Has anyone ever thought about the identity of the Headless Horseman? Do we know a name? Do we know who that soldier is? He was a Hessian mercenary. They were hired by the Germans to come over here and help fight during the Revolution because the British, for whatever reason, didn't want to expend the men or couldn't expend the men in certain war zones along the Hudson River. So they would hire these Germans to come in. These Hessian warriors were actually known to be quite diabolical. They were really ruthless guys. They were very tough. They were very sadistic, and that's why the British loved to send them and let them loose on the colonists. So, but yeah, we have the Headless Horseman. No one knows who this guy is. And when I was doing research, and turns out no one really cared until 2021. I mean, when I was little, I remember I'd seen the Tim Burton movie with what's his name? Johnny Depp, but the Headless Horseman was portrayed by Christopher Walken. And that's kind of when I was younger, I was like, but who was he really? Well, we didn't really know. Until 2021, we had a sleuth writer whose name was Christopher Rodina, who wrote a book that was called, Legends of Sleepy Hollow, The Lost History of the Headless Horseman. This writer actually flew out to Germany and was able to look at some old war records. And there were two Hessians that were killed in action on November 1st, 1776 in that area. And one of them was a drummer, probably not him. The other was a 24-year-old grenadier or artilleryman whose name was Heinrich Range of Melanesian. And he died on All Hallows Day. And like I said, he was a grenadier. So his big thing was he really loved throwing stuff. Kind of reminds me of somebody. And so if any of you guys also want to look into it, it's a fascinating book. I have not myself read it. I'd be interested to. I'm citing a source from another book called Histories and Mysteries of the Hudson Valley, Volume 2. And I just thought I'd share, while I'm doing all this research on the legend of Washington Irving's Headless Horseman, if it had never occurred to anyone, who was that guy? He was probably an artilleryman who, died auspiciously on All Hallows Day. I always want to say Eve. And so I took the story after it was finished and I submitted it to Andrea Macco and Sylvia Hasenkampf over at the Porcupine Soup, And I'd been telling them, I'd been working on this for a really long time. I'd been doing side stories in the meantime, so they would have something to put in the paper. It was always, is the Merwin thing done yet? Is the Merwin thing done? You wanted to put this in here. It's not like I'm asking, This was your thing. Finally, it got put in there, and it was received very well. I was really glad that I was able to take this weird part of history that, again, just like the Headless Horseman, was overlooked. If there's a literary, Washington Irving already has like a pretty strong toehold in Greene County anyway, but if there is any chance that we have people over here that are related to Ichabod Crane, by the way, Celia's great-granduncle by 7 generations. If there's any chance that we're related to him, I feel like that should have been noted somewhere. If not just on a plaque in a library, something. I wish someone would have pointed it out, but it's okay. I did the legwork. I had some help from Kara and Holly. We figured it out. And like I said, the newspaper article was received pretty well. If in the future I ever get a chance to, get that story out somewhere else, I would love to, because there's... So when I write for the Porcupine Soup, my thing is I like to take people who are local and I like to shine a little bit of light on them. They could still be alive today. I love that. But they can also be from a very long time ago. But the fact is that history doesn't just stop in the books that we read. History is all around us. History is happening right now. When I write about the Bruder Hops and all the cool things that they do for their community, actually, and that's one way of me showing, that's history. That is history. Alex Winequist, who just opened a musical recording studio in Cairo Junction. Recording in the Catskills is a time-honored tradition. David Bowie did it. Van Morrison did it. Bob Dylan did it. These guys, we've been recording in the Catskills for a long time. It's Americana. That's absolutely something that we've been doing for a really long time. And to me, that's history. When I did my interview with Jonathan Palmer, he's a great historian, an awesome archivist for Greene County, and now he's over in Ulster County digging even deeper into older records. That's history to me too. All of these people deserve their day in the sun. Everyone deserves to be able to read about these guys for inspiration, to while away the time, and to, as a good friend of mine once said, to have the tacit understanding of where you come from. Because if you want to understand the future, seriously, look to the past. We're doing the same things all the time with minor changes in medicine and technology. So I guess with that being said, does anyone have any other questions or anything that they would like to ask me? Yes?
I'd just like to know who's the one that started the tannery here? And
Who founded Jewett?
right here, wasn't there one in Prattsville?
So Zadock Pratt was that tannery model, Jessie. He hasn't had a chance to take the tour yet. She's asking who was the tanner
That
started this tannery. That would be Zadock.
Oh, that would have, yeah. So
himself.
that would have been Zadock, not a Merwin. They were more. The Merwins are all over in Jewett, and then they started off. They made their way across the mountain to Tannersville, and then now they're in Catskill. They're coming.
But they were sort of going down the mountain as opposed to
Coming up.
Actually,
I was up
here.
But you referred to a connection to Prattsville. Somewhere you mentioned.
Yeah, they would come over to Prattsville was kind of like more of a, I don't want to even say a town, settlement, better settlement. You would be able to probably get more here than you would have when Jewett was still kind of catching its break, because Jewett was, I mean, you could even go there today. It's still, if you want to buy something, you're probably going to go to Hunter or Prattsville, one of the surrounding towns. It didn't evolve all that much. I would say that they still had the post office, and I think there was a tavern that's not there anymore. I think there was a tavern in Jewett, but it was just more of a neighborhood, if anything. Now that I would describe it more as a residential area than a town. So if you wanted to interact with anybody or get food, water, you'd have to probably ride over to Prattsville, Hunter, Windham proper. Which even then, actually, Prattsville was probably still more of a high-budget settlement than even Windham when Jewett was first starting off.
I think that tavern you were talking about was moved up to Cooperstown.
That is possible. I was up there researching in Athens. One of my next stories in Athens, we had the trademark, the patent for the sewing machine. And so I found out that the descendants of that family are currently up, she is currently up in Cooperstown, New York. And when I was up there, we visited the Farmers Museum and saw something that kind of, we found a church that was taken from Cornwallville and completely reconstructed there.
The Bump Tavern,
yes.
which was Route 23 and
Where was
West
the tavern?
Settlement Road. So
Oh.
Route 23, West Settlement, which really is Ashland and not Wyndham, but people think it's Wyndham. It sat right on the corner, and then it went to Cooperstown, where it was
Okay.
restored, and you can still see
That's
it.
the Bump Tavern.
The
That's
Bump
where-
Tavern.
Kevin.
That could be that might be the tavern that.
I guess that's the tavern I was thinking about, it was moved.
Again, me and Carolyn had this discussion about how sometimes it gets very difficult to sort of nail down what would have been where at certain times. Like I said, the territories, both county and town-wise, have changed in this area a lot. Where we're standing, where we're standing right now might have been Schoharie, could have been Delaware, could have been Ulster. You know, they switched town lines and county lines so often that it's just, you know, you go by the text and whatever they recognize it as, because that's what they would have written. You know, you would have been like, I live in Greene County, I live in Delaware County, I live in Roxbury, no, wait, hold on, no, I live in Saugerties, I don't know. However they switched it up, that never happened, it wasn't that drastic. Saugerties is a little too far, but.
Well, Carolyn, didn't Zadock Pratt grow up in Jewett?
So he grew up in Jewett, so Jessie and I have had this conversation, and if Jessie doesn't mind my adding my 2 cents.
Oh, absolutely not.
What he's saying is really true about research. So I like to give an example. I'm standing here right now. In 1710, this was Albany County. In 1765, this is Woodstock. Okay,
I know, it blows your mind, right?
And the settlement here, locally, I live in Mill Basin in Brooklyn, that's where I'm from, but that's not a real name, it's not a municipality, it's just a place you live. So they lived in what was called Schoharie. It was a settlement, not a town. The town would have been, there wasn't even the concept of a town. So it was Albany County, then it was the town of Woodstock. From Woodstock, it becomes Wyndham. So what Jessie and I have talked about is that I could tell you I lived in Wyndham in 1808, but I lived in Prattsville.
Yeah.
You are not going to find your people there. You're going to find them in the cemetery here. In 1832, this becomes the town of Wyndham, Prattsville.
Yeah.
So Prattsville secedes, and then it's followed by Ashland. Red Falls was Prattsville.
Yeah.
Then it leaves, it becomes Ashland. Then Lexington breaks off. Then Jewett breaks off. So unless you know those dates, you can't find your people. Unless, as Jessie is saying, you know exactly what year and where you're standing, just like Back to the Future. You haven't moved.
And that's also, that's Prattsville was a town, Jewett was a settlement.
Right.
So like I said, even to this day, if you go to Jewett, it's going to just be a cluster of houses. You have nowhere to do your shopping, you have nowhere to buy your groceries or clothes or anything like that. So naturally back then you would go to the towns, Prattsville, which had a huge tannery. I mean, like, of course you're going there for your clothes, you know, or you would, you might go as far away as Catskill, you know, if where Pratt's dollar, Zadock Pratt owned his own bank that was backed by himself. His money was worth as much as the US dollar, and was accepted as far away as Catskill thanks to a banking charter. I think it was 1833, Andrew Jackson. He said, hey everybody, listen, we're still figuring out how currency works. If you want your own, it's fine. You just have to financially kind of back it yourself, you know, and don't let us find out you're not doing that.
Well, I brought that up about Jewett just because you had posited that he would have known Merwins, and I'm saying that they grew up in Merwin from a young age, then of course
So,
they did.
exactly.
And also
So
his store was there, right? That he was in
Right.
partnership with his brothers was in
So he would, if you're very steeped in the history of Zadock Pratt, which you're dealing with a different historical character, you would know that the Pratts and the Merwins probably knew each other really well because Zadock Pratt Sr. lived there with his wife and his, I think, 6 children, one of whom was Zadock. So definitely, they could have even gone to school together, although that's not, I've never done research on that, Jessie, so I don't know.
So Medad Hunt lived from 1742 to 1814, I have in my notes. Zadock Pratt would have been 1790 to 1871.
That's right.
So, yeah, like I said, you know, it's not documented anywhere. I wish there was a cool story, like a League of Extraordinary Gentlemen type deal where like the 3 of them were out like doing cool stuff. Unfortunately, there's no maybe I'll write something, you know. Unfortunately, there's no like cool stories we have about that. But these are all guys that are, you know, living in a settlement that is up here in the mountains, and you know, back then it's cut off from the rest of the world. I mean, you cannot possibly imagine how hard it was to get down to like Catskill. I think even before no one even wanted a road from Palinville to Hunter until the automobile was made, and then they took 150 convicts and set them up in shanties at Catterskill Falls and said, build it, you know, and then they taught all summer, they were just sitting there, blasted the mountain out with dynamite and laying down some foundation to try to make some semblance of, it didn't look as good as it does now, but some semblance of a road that your older cars would have been able to traverse up, because that's where all the money was in the tourism up at the Catskill Mountain House and the Laurel House and all that. So, you know, back then, no one was just like, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to run into Catskill for the day and do my shopping. No, that was 10 hours by foot. By horse, you're probably cutting that off by 2 hours. So you're looking at 7 or 8 hour horse ride. That's to get to Catskill. Then you want to get back, probably before nightfall. So, you know, you make friends up here. You know, these are the human beings that this is literally the hill you die on. You know, you make friends with the locals because like these are the people you're probably going to be interacting with for the rest of your life. You're going to see them at church. You're going to see them when you go shopping. You're going to see them when you gossip at the tavern, when you do business and you trade and you go hiking, even though that probably wouldn't have been like a hilarious joke back then because everything was a hike. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like I'm just saying that even though it's not documented, I have a feeling the 3 of them met, you know, and hopefully.
And there was probably a herd of Merwins that worked for the tannery because there was hundreds.
Oh, there had to be, yeah, absolutely. There, you don't have that many people, and no one goes. Not to mention, they're descended from Miles Merwin, a well-known tanner. That's right. You know, he made his money tanning. He built his first house over Brick Kiln Swamp, which was located back in Milford, Connecticut. So these guys come from tanners, and by no means was Miles the only tanner. This goes. You know, if I had to sit here and tell you guys the story of every Merwin from Miles going all the way to even Thomas, you know, I'd be like, we're gonna have to move this to 7, generously. But you know, there was a lot of tanners in between, and let's face it, it was just a very popular occupation to have up here at the time. Zadock Pratt had the largest tannery in the world up here, at one point or another. But then we also had tanneries, you know, blowing up all over the place. As far as Margaretville. You know, we had Tannersville, you know, and then like all over the Hunter area. It was we just had the supply here, you know, and we had the demand here. Why not do it? Popular job. So yeah, I like to think that they met. Did anybody else want to add to anything or have a question about anything that I've asked or talked about today?
Are you going to continue your research?
You know what? I actually would like to continue my research on the Merwins moving forward from that. You know, like I found the connection, but I mean, like I kind of want to see what else happened in between, because just looking for this connection, I found out about all this stuff. You know, so I'm like, if I start looking at, you know, what did the other people do up here in Greene County? Thomas founded Jewett, but then what? You know, who were his kids? You know, who was his grandchildren? What's going on in Jewett today? Is it really possible that in all my research I was only able to locate 4 Merwins that were alive today? No, I think there's probably more around here. Go to Gilboa?
A friend of mine, he clowns me out. He's a Merwin.
Is he? Yeah, see, and I just, you know, it's just a matter of like, you got to figure out how to get a hold of him and stuff like that. And unfortunately, I don't think, Kara's books, I think, only go to a certain point. By the way, for her books were cited by the Miles Merwin Association in Connecticut who still meet all the time, I think at least once a year, to preserve their family's history over there. So this was, I just wanted you guys to know, this wasn't just someone or anybody writing these books. It was written by a Merwin as well, or actually a group of them. And yeah, probably that and the Old Times in Wyndham were my most reliable sources of information, other than talking to actual Merwins when I was doing the research for all of this. And of course, Carolyn, who was a tremendous help also. She kept me going. And
So Jesse, you're gonna write a book so that we can have what you learned?
yeah. I think that would probably be, like I said, if it's not going to show up anywhere, if it was this hard for me to find this information, I'd hate for it to get lost to the histories again and make someone else's life easier. So in the future, if they ever did have questions like this, they'll be available. So yeah, there's some kind of pamphlet, something I would like, a little guide, a little memo, just giving you a quick idea of where the connection is between all of that. And I think it would also be important to be able to especially have a presence of that in Columbia County, Kinderhook, and up here on the mountain in Prattsville and Jewett, where these kinds of things are prominent. If I was 19 again and I found this information, I would think it was so cool. I'd be so, again, just as if I don't have enough pride from being from this area with everything, I would also love to hear about that as well. This is a story that's known throughout the entire world, and it started here. So, yes, Kara.
And Jessie, just so you know, so my family originated from up here. So we also originated from up here. My grandmother was Adeline Merwin, and she was a village clerk in Tannersville for 30 years. You know Athena. I was going to say about it afterwards. My mother was Diane, and then there was Willard, and so my grandmother Adeline was married to George, and so we're going to go back to names that kind of lasted through history, and George came from Willard, and Willard came from another George. So we go down through the history. Amasa Merwin, going way back.
See, the girls have the cooler names.
Amasa Merwin, who is buried over in Maple Crest. He's actually was the mayor of Tannersville. He would be my great-great-great-grandfather. So, Amasa had Willard. I think it was Sarah. I'm going to try to remember her name. Well, Sarah gave birth to Amasa. Amasa had Willard, and then we go down the line. So Diane, Marion, and Willard. Diane was my mother. She was a Merwin. So, and we're over on that side. We're in
the cemetery and Tanner going towards Lexington, right?
Yes.
Yeah, she showed me a bunch of really cool photos of the Merwin, them hanging out back in the day.
They were married to the Waces. So there's a big Wace family up here as well. We have a big picture in our house that says the Wace family homestead that was located, I think, somewhere in Jewett, or the Merwin family homestead. I don't know where it is, but it's this big farm picture. But it's pretty neat.
It is pretty neat, and that's the reason I would love to talk to them, as many as I can find that are still locally in the area, because that's the point. I want to be like, hey, these guys are still around here. They haven't left after how many hundreds of years? Catskills must be a pretty great place.
Yeah.
I agree. By the way, we have our own Merwins, and they are located in what now would be considered the town of Roxbury, the municipality of Grand Gorge on Route 23 going towards Grand Gorge. And their history connects with the original patent holder, Johannes Hardenberg. And also, when you talked about blacksmith, the most famous blacksmith forge was there on Route 23, across from the Hardenberg house. It was two Merwin brothers. One was right-handed, one was left-handed. So they built a two-hand forge, and it was the only two-hand forge in New York State. And Henry Ford, when he used to drive to go to visit Woodchuck Lodge, and John Burroughs used to stop off to hang out with the Merwin brothers. Wow. So you got to look into that.
It's on you. Keep following this family line and blow your mind what they are involved in. Was that the story? I heard John Burroughs and Henry Ford were driving along one day and the car broke down, and he turns to Henry, he's like, "Can you fix this?" He goes, "No, I got guys for that."
Yeah. That's maybe how Henry came to know the Merwins. But the other story that's really great, just because you're here especially, is that Charlie Merwin, who was then later than the two-handed forge guys, but Charlie
That's so
Merwin,
cool.
he was courting Agnes Hardenberg. Agnes Hardenberg was the last Hardenberg in her line. She owned the Hardenberg house, which is probably the oldest house in this region, and has a history of enslavement as well, because Johannes Hardenberg was the largest slave owner in New York State. He owned, among others, Sojourner Truth, but she was not here, by the way. She was down in Hurley. But so Charlie Merwin dated Agnes Hardenberg, and they were going to marry. And he wanted her to take his name, which was the custom, so she would become Agnes Merwin. She said no, because she was an only child and a girl. So when she married the Hardenberg name, he said no, and so they broke up. They never married, but when she died, I'm not sure how he got the house, whether she left it to him or he bought the house from the estate, but then he ran it as a bed and breakfast. She had been running it as an inn and an antique store. So a lot of people knew Charlie Merwin, and Charlie Merwin is the grandfather of a woman in New Jersey who just got in touch with me because of your article.
Oh.
And
Okay.
she wanted to come up here, and she's coming up on Wednesday.
Awesome.
But the best, to thank you and to show you what good research does, is she said, oh my God, I have so much information about the Merwins and about the Hardenberg house. So your article has helped. I'm going to call you immediately and say,
it would be
come
an excellent
see.
addition to that story, yeah. And it
For
was
you.
just crazy how many. So I told you guys earlier about the Miles Merwin Association, whose citations were in the books that Carol was so nice to share with me. There's there's the biggest and largest, most well-known group of them gets together in Connecticut, but they have chapters. I'm telling you, these Merwins, they're everywhere. Wisconsin, there's a heavy chapter. Florida has a heavy chapter. And this is just in the United States. I didn't even look into the other countries, but I can imagine that like all over the UK where they started, there's probably got to be at least 5. You know what I mean? And I strategically use that number because I mean like each one is probably no less than 200 members. So
I'm curious to know, how do you feel? Because you're connected to one of the most famous stories in the world. How does that make you feel?
I think it's fabulous. I think it's really fabulous. I love. So my son is a good friend of Jesse's.
Joe, cool guy.
Yes, and Joe. I guess Joe connected them. He happened to see that you were doing an article on the Merwin family, and next thing you know, Joey reaches out to me and goes, "Mom, this is your family," and I just think this is amazing. I love ancestry. I love looking up genealogy. I just think like you said a quote before about the past and the future. You really do not know where you're at in life unless you go back. You go back and you see your heritage. So I just think it's amazing. I think it's amazing. I think it's a legacy I can pass down to my boys. This is one of my 4 Chase here.
So how does he feel? How do you feel knowing that you were related to one of the most famous characters in literature?
Average.
Average. and that's the Merwin humble trait.
You had told me, I think when we got off the phone the first time we had spoken, you were like, oh, I'm excited. I'm going to go read The Headless Horseman again with like new eyes. And I was just like, yes, please do.
I tried to show it to the children, but there's so many different versions. And the older version, they were just like, is this almost over? Like, when does it happen? I'm like, this is exciting. Hang in there.
When they're older, they'll love the original.
And I thank Jessie so much because I had those books for years. They were passed down through my family. And I would look at the books and I'm like, I'm not even sure. And you kind of had to go backwards in them. So getting together with Jessie was such a find. It really was a find to sit with him and have somebody work with me, or I'm working with him, together to be able to kind of sort out details.
That's so exciting.
It's so much fun. I encourage anybody who, wants to know
It
what
was a
family
fun
history to do
experience.
it.
I really loved doing it.
Can I post a link to your story on our Facebook page so
Absolutely.
people can
Spread it as far
read
as you want. I think it's the
Okay.
Merwins are they're not just a local, they're not just like local. They're all over the place. Like hopefully more Merwins will get in touch with me. I'd love to learn more about a fascinating family. I mean, this is if they are indeed the biggest family in North America, which reading that book it felt like it. I wouldn't mind having those friends.
So I'm going to post it on Facebook, Zadock Pratt Museum, and you'll be able to read Jessie's story. Also, I wanted to add loving local history the way you do. When you said that Miles Merwin married an Ives, it's amazing that these names...
That was Thomas Merwin.
Oh, Thomas
Married
Merwin, that's
extra
even...
Ives.
Okay.
They dragged her out here and said, we're going to live in this field.
The Merwins are still there in Jewett and Wyndham. The Ives are still there in Jewett and
Didn't
Wyndham.
know that. Good data.
Okay.
Did not know the Ives.
So for many years,
Knew
Edie
Harold.
Ives was
The
the
Harold.
secretary of the Wyndham Action Jewett School, and there was another local name that you said, and they're still there.
The
I can't remember, but you were like rattling them off, and I'm like, oh my God, these people
There was a
are
lot.
still
This is a
here.
story with a lot of players.
Yeah.
Of course, this is a play. If you look at it in the scheme of a play, it's got like 3,000 acts.
It's true.
Yeah.
Better
So-
watch out, you're gonna all end up on public TV.
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah, the good parts.
Yeah,
The good
yeah,
ones.
his name is on it every week. He does this big generational thing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, could happen, this could fill up all half hour,
We should send it because Jessie's
right?
oh my God, we're gonna send it, Jessie.
Yeah, that's great. I
That's
have no
cool.
problem being on TV. I actually used to do stuff for Lighthouse TV and Saugerties, so this
You
is
guys gonna
great.
end up on TV.
So,
cool.
yeah, guys, that's the Literary Connection. Kara, I also want to thank you for coming out. It feels good having a Merwin in the audience.
Yes.
And I want to thank all you guys for taking an interest in this. It's local history, and it's important. So, thank you very much, everybody.